am I missing? I feel like I'm missing something significant. Anybody help me out? Is that pretty much it?
And anything that would benefit the rest of us particularly?
Well, it was about how to make it more palatable. So it's some of what got talked about earlier about using terms that relate to competence, risk management, et cetera. We also talked about using mindfulness to help law students really find their jam so that they're not just on a track into big law automatically, but they have the opportunity to really consider what options are going to fit them the best.
I think Judy.
Thanks, you guys. So I think we were sort of on two sides of some of the ways to talk about mindfulness to lawyers are to talk about competence and hard skills, and that there are really a bunch of clear, hard skills that we can talk about gaining from mindfulness, like efficiency and focus and not being so activated. And then how do we also talk about some of the softer skills that are just as important, like well-being, and people starting to talk about that and getting some encouragement, and that there's now a community of us. Here we are. And this is only really a small portion of the community. Look at what's happening at Mint's Mindfulness and at Axiom and other places. So starting to, I guess, declare more that this community is getting larger, and that we can do the Trojan horse thing, and we can also start to be more direct.
Sort of the pragmatics. Yeah. Okay, thank you. And in the 1304 group, I could report, but that doesn't make much sense. So who was in 1304 that wants to? They all left.
No, there's someone.
Is there anybody who survived 1304? Okay, so one over there. I know it was heated, but not that much.
They're all pointing there.
Hello. I didn't feel like we had an overly strict agenda, but we just generally talked about mindfulness and what it all meant for us. And I personally got a lot out of it because we talked about, in my opinion, and this is through my filter, why it is perhaps so hard to meditate and why a lot of people say they're not good at it. And I really had an epiphany that probably none of us are good at it in the very beginning, just because of the nature of our brains and how active they are, and that's why we should do it. So I think we had a really healthy discussion about that, and there were some people in the group who had some extra tools that they told us about that were helpful. And so it was just a good discussion. So thank you.
Thank you. So, Damaris.
Thanks, everyone, for reporting back. It's nice to have the opportunity to engage in some of these concepts with each other in smaller settings. And I know I can share, I was sharing with my partner, actually, because in our group we had an exercise like what was described, where we partnered up and talked about some of our takeaways from today. And one of the things that I realized was that when I came into the room this morning, I felt this let me preface this by saying, so last week I went to another lawyers' activity. It was called Law and Social Justice Jam, which is not necessarily centered on mindfulness, but incorporates some mindfulness techniques as well. And this is a program where lawyers and other social justice activists, what Lizette mentioned around identities, social identities, and we haven't had a chance to talk about that a lot today. But mindfulness is also an opportunity to explore those kinds of concepts and to look at how we can engage with these different concepts in ways that will really help us to create more equity and inclusion. And so, for example, you know, though there hasn't been a lot of time in today, we had a jam-packed day, and it's been awesome. All of the speakers have been really incredible. One just takeaway from the experience that I had at the jam that I want to share with you all, because I think it does help to, another way of looking at this idea is around social identities. And I'll try to make this fairly brief. We had this exercise where everyone was to put their ways that we identify and ways that society identifies us on the board. And somewhat innocuous, right? You know, everyone's just writing things on the board: mother, daughter, lawyer, teacher, sister, you know, black, white, gay, straight, you know, what have you. And then afterwards, we're sharing about it, and I just became overwhelmed with these feelings of pain around how unfair it is that just based on these identities, people are treated so differently. And, you know, we talked about being in our safe zone, our stretch zone, our panic zone. And I really started to go into this panic zone of this amount of pain that I was going to be overcome with because of all of the, you know, injustice based on these different identities. And so I shared that, and I started to really break down like, okay, I can't even be in this room anymore because I don't want to deal with all that's coming up for me around this. And so we had a break, and, you know, we went on. And I realized afterwards that I was able to stay engaged, and I continued. We had another exercise. It was really good. And I realized that if I had shut down, which I was tempted to do, and to go back to my cabin and read a book, which is what I do, you know, when these painful feelings come up, you know, just get away from the situation. Avoidance is what, you know, we learned. I didn't do that. I stayed with it and realized that everyone has some level of pain. I was getting into, well, African-American pain trumps everybody else's pain, and I don't want to hear about any white guilt and white shame right now because, you know, it's just unfair. And I realized by pushing through that and staying engaged that everybody's dealing with some level of pain. And each person's pain is painful to them. And so by me looking at, you know, okay, well, this group's pain is more than that group's pain, it shuts down the opportunity to really engage on a deeper level and to connect just as humans, as everybody dealing with something that it is that they need to heal from. Everyone's healing is their own personal healing, and by sort of categorizing them, that doesn't help to bring us together. In fact, just the opposite. So it was really a learning experience for me, and I know I've collapsed a lot of different concepts together, but that's what some of the things that were coming up for me.
Thank you. Lynn.
My story starts when I was in law school. I was first in my class, not in grades, but in anxiety. I'm pretty sure for doing this. And there are a bunch of people leading this who had a lot of ideas, and Joseph Goldstein was the lead meditation teacher, and he also had a lot of ideas. So I'm looking around, and I found out that there was this law firm in Boston then called Hale and Dorr, big important firm, which had John Kabat-Zinn and Ferris Urbanowski, one of his colleagues, come in and teach mindfulness to the lawyers. And then I met Brenda Fingold, who's right over there, and she was running this. She was the partner in charge of training, and she had done this. Brenda, I believe, is the real pioneer in this field. And the second pioneer is Charlie Halprin, who organized this Yale retreat and then organized, I think, about 2 more Yale Law School retreats, and then another one for Columbia Law students. And all of this took place in New York or in New England. It was much different then to put out mindfulness into the wider community. It wasn't known as well. The reception was harder to predict. The first time I presented it to a large audience was at an ABA meeting in Atlanta. And there were about 300 lawyers in the room, and it was a session on wellness for lawyers. And when I asked people to close their eyes and observe their breath, I didn't know whether anyone would close their eyes. I had a little fear that everyone would sit there looking at me, but they did, and nothing bad happened. So then I started teaching it in law school, and my greater message is things are much easier now, but we still have the same kinds of worries as we had then, and we have to pay attention to them. So I started teaching in law school and started writing articles about this, a law review article, and started to teach it in class. And what I want to say about that is I didn't do that until I was 56 years old when I did that, and I was pretty well established as a law professor, so I didn't worry that this would hurt my career. If I had been much younger, I would have really worried about that, or less established. So I started doing it, and then most of the students really liked it, and there were only about 4 law professors, 5 in the country who were doing anything with mindfulness, and we all knew each other. And it went pretty well in the law school, although 2 of my colleagues just hated it, and they were really kind of attacking me not quite in public, but in meetings, and reading all the footnotes in my article and challenging my citations and things like that. And there were others. There's one who just hated the whole idea, I think because he's very macho, and I'm not. And so, but mainly it was fine. But I want to tell you about 2 events that were not so fun and really made me worry about what the receptivity will be. So the first was I was invited to give a plenary presentation and an address at a dinner the night before sponsored by the Supreme Court of a state whose name I won't mention. And it was a dispute resolution conference. So I went in for the first night. There was this dinner. I sat with about 7 members of the state Supreme Court, and we had a great time. I mean, we really got along. And I gave a talk in which, in those days, I had about 3 or 4 jokes that I always used with a group like this. And they were, the group they were rolling on the floor. They loved this. So then the next day, I'm doing a big plenary session, so there were 250 people there, and I didn't appreciate this before, but none of them knew what they were getting into. They just saw this as the plenary session, so we'll go. And I thought it was going okay, and then 2 things happened, but the most difficult one was in 2009 when I was invited by then president of the Massachusetts Bar, who said he wanted me to present mindfulness at the annual dinner of the Massachusetts Bar. He said, we will record it, and it's going on our website. I want every lawyer in Massachusetts to learn mindfulness. And I thought, wow. And then he said, we can pay you this or that, which is way more than I was accustomed to getting. When I flew in, there was a town car waiting for me, and they drove me to a hotel that was about less than a mile away and was way nicer than hotels I was accustomed to. And I was feeling just great. I'm thinking, wow, look at me. What a great opportunity, and they're paying me this much, and I'm in this hotel, and there's a limousine, and all these people are going to be there. So, and it's several people I knew from New England came in for this because they were lawyers who were into mindfulness. And so when I walk in, some of you will be familiar with the federal courthouse in Boston. Some of you are familiar with it. It's very beautiful. It's on a body of water, and there are windows that must go up 100 feet overlooking whatever it is, the bay or something. So I walk into this building, and there's a huge lobby, and there are hundreds of lawyers there talking, and they're having a cocktail party. And I walk in and I say, this might be a little hard to do. And I said to my host or somebody who was taking care of this, where will I do this? And they explained that the lawyers would be sitting right near the window, and I would be on an elevated platform where all the speakers were. So I immediately realized that this was big trouble, and I asked if they could be really careful about when they took the plates away, and to make sure they serve the dessert as soon as they can or something, or so we didn't have the noise. Then there were a whole bunch of speakers, all kinds of awards and things. I'm looking around, and everybody's having this great time. They're drinking, they're talking to their friends, they're laughing. And Ed McIntyre, the president, at one point just said, let's go. And I went up to the podium, and this is what it was like. It was as if I was standing over the cabin where pilots would sit in a 747. I was standing on the top of the 747, and the audience were sitting on the wings, and the wings were going. I was up here looking down about 25 feet at the wings that were going out like that. And they're all having a great time, and they're talking, and I'm saying to myself, this isn't going to work. And I remembered stories about hearing the Dalai Lama when he was he was giving a presentation, and all he did was laugh. And everybody laughed, and it was great. And I thought, well, maybe I should do that. But I wasn't the Dalai Lama, and I was kind of scared. I knew I've got to improvise, but I didn't actually improvise. So I began with I had a regular shtick at the time, which involved telling a couple of funny stories and then asking them to eat a raisin. Most of you know that exercise. And so I had raisins on the table, which it was just the most inappropriate thing. They were having dinner and their drinks. They're not going to focus on a raisin. And so I didn't do that, but I told my little joke, and I don't remember, I kept going because I just didn't know what to do. And all the time I'm thinking, beam me up, Scotty. And I know there are people listening to me, and I can see that. And the one group I remember is people who had driven from Vermont to Boston for this thing because it was a big deal, they thought. But most people were not. And I'm going on, and I don't know if I was literally sweating, but I was just miserable and did not know what to do when the fire meeting, and we never met again. We just went into the program without it. So be careful about the federal courts is the other thing. So it's just really important to make careful decisions about what you'll do when, the timing, what you're going to do, the circumstances, and it's still an issue.
Fire alarm.
Let's go. It could happen. It could happen here. So I'm done.
There's no fire. Well, I don't know how to follow that.
Pull these two together.
Well, I think I want to say I met Len a long time ago because my wife was the first. When I was Chief Justice, the first thing I sponsored was legislation to institute court-annexed ADR in Utah. So my wife turned out to be the person who was hired to, I mean, she wasn't my wife at the time. She was hired to be the first executive director, and then she got to know Len, and somehow I got to know Len like a long time ago, back when, as he's saying, there weren't very many people doing mediation.
Yeah.
So trying to pull together what we heard.
Have to do that. I was just saying that as a joke.
Okay.
You don't have to do that.
I'll try. I'll take a shot at it. You know.
And if I could just interrupt, does everyone know who Judge Zimmerman is? Has everyone had his introduction? Do you want to
Okay,
speak?
so
I think
I'll give you the 2-minute version. I went to law school at Utah. I'd never met a lawyer. In those days, you could work your way through law school. You didn't have to borrow money. And I got very fortunate and got a clerkship with Warren Berger when he was on the D.C. Circuit, and then he got appointed to the Supreme Court, so I was a clerk on the Supreme Court. And then I went to work at O'Melveny and Myers, just as Gulu did. I was there for 6 years, then I went to teach law school at the U and University of Utah, a job I took because when I went to interview, the second day I was there, my father dropped dead. So I thought I needed to go back and be around the family, but I didn't really like teaching law school. So then I was looking for something to do, and somebody said the governor of Utah needed a special counsel, and I didn't know who he was, and we had breakfast, and we liked each other a lot, and he hired me for $10,000 a year. So I set up a sole practice to keep mind and body together. Then I joined a law firm and litigated, and I'm a pretty intense person, and I was getting migraine headaches and everything, and went to see a fellow who said, you should try meditation, and I said, that's a nice idea, and I read a few books, and I didn't do anything. And then I got appointed to the Utah Supreme Court by that same governor. And 10 years later, I was just about to become Chief Justice, and my wife, who was 41, was diagnosed with terminal melanoma. And we had 3 children, 4, 8, and 11, 3 girls. And 2 weeks later, the nurse who lived across the street said, there's a fellow coming to town to teach about meditation for people who have pain and can't resolve it with analgesics, and Lynn that might be helpful. And it was John Kabat-Zinn, and he came and did a 3-day presentation. And we went to it, and my wife was getting depressed, and she didn't take to it much. I read his book, Full Catastrophe Living. I read a few other things, but I didn't do much with it. And during the following year, I tried antidepressants, which I hated. I drank a little more. I exercised more. And then finally, just before she died, I started sitting. And I would just go out on the porch in the morning because I was feeling I didn't know how I was going to raise these girls. I didn't know how I was going to do all this work. I was 50, and I just had no solutions. So I would get up in the morning and go out and just sit. And I did that, and it was amazing because during the time I was sitting, there was no problem. You know, I couldn't do anything about my wife's illness. I couldn't live in the future and take care of my children. I couldn't go back and change the past. And the air on my skin was nice, and the sounds of the cars going by was fine, and I didn't need any hope, and I didn't have any fear. So it really struck me that this was, I went with a 500-person firm, Phoenix, Snell and Wilmer out of Phoenix when I left the court. And then 7 years ago, I started an appellate boutique in Utah. And we are profit-making and not profit-maximizing, and we expect about 1,100 hours a year from our lawyers. And we pay way less than market, and we have absolutely no trouble hiring people. And everybody's office has a dog door. And we have yoga 2 days a week. For any lawyer who wants to come, it's free. And we're prospering. We're not rich, but we're prospering. And I think, you know, the former, actually, Christine Durham, who was on the court with me and was for 34 years on the court and just retired, and she's now joining us. And she did my daughter's wedding, and my wife was telling her that I take my mother-in-law and my wife's son, who has Down syndrome, to lunch, or to dinner, once a week. And Christine said to me, you know, Michael, you've become a nice man. Nobody would have said that 30 years ago. So I think this practice is amazing. I think I listened to Damaris and thinking, you know, there's law, big law, is premised on a false view of what we are as humans. It's premised on the view that we're isolate beings, that we are heads with bodies as sort of things to move us around, that we are just intellectual machines. And it's cruel. It's a cruel way to think of us when we are, as E.O. Wilson refers to us, eusocial beings. We're hive creatures. We love each other. You know, we're intimate beings. And as Damaris said, we're all in pain. Everybody's in pain. Nobody has a monopoly on pain. There are no hierarchies of pain until we acknowledge everyone's in pain. I was listening to what the first group was doing, this listening exercise. And you know, the reason it's so hard to listen when you're sitting across from somebody is because we are so connected with each other. You look at a person, you listen to a person, you sense what they're thinking, you're conversing with them, and you can't just listen. It's very hard. In the second group, you know, you're talking about the pragmatics. How do you sell this to senior partners who are profit maximizing, to pay the rainmakers, to hire enough lawyers, to generate enough hours to pay the rainmakers so they don't go to another law firm? And how do you induce young people to go to work for big firms so they can pay off their student loans and hope some of them stick around? But there's always a, you know, it's always just like slave labor. You can always find some more of it. And I think the subversive message of this group is that you do not have to adhere to the Milton Friedman school of law practice. You know, that we can have practices that are humane, that are egalitarian, and that are profit-making. And I had a very good friend who just died in February. He was a billionaire, self-made billionaire. And I was friends with him for like 40 years, and I was kind of his consigliere in a lot of ways. But he didn't die happy. And we just need to sit still and be quiet. So we should all recognize that we're all lousy meditators. There's no such thing as a good meditator. Scott pointed out in our section, you know, as Sharon Salzberg says, I've just been listening to her I'm taking her new course on love, which is really good. She says, it's that moment when you recognize that you've been carried away by a story. That's enlightenment. That moment when you say, oh, I'm really right here, I'm not there. You're already enlightened the moment you do that. And because you're lawyers, you're going to all think you have to get better at it. And I would say just keep doing it. It'll take care of you. So thank you.
An uplifting and inspiring final session. Wow, you know, how often do you get to go to a legal conference and actually get wisdom? What a concept. So, at any rate, hello? Okay, good. So, we have just a few orders of business before the reception. We've learned a lot in this during the course of today. I certainly have. One of the things we've learned is what Friday at 4 o'clock looks like in the legal community. And so we have a little bit smaller of a crowd, but a few announcements. First of all, I want to ask Kira. Where are you? There she is. I want to ask Kira to talk a little bit, just for a minute, about a couple of CLE issues. And then I've got some thanks and one last.
Can everyone hear me? Oh, okay. I guess I'll use this. Hi. I hope you enjoyed today's conference. I enjoyed seeing all of you. Two things. The CLE form that you got with the white form on top and the yellow on the bottom, if you could make sure you checked off every session you were on and include all of your information. Oh.
The codes are Petunia, Petunia, and Daffodil, Daffodil, for those at home.
Oh, I forgot we have a live stream audience. Hello. So the white form, please return to me. There's a box in the middle table in the registration area. The yellow form you keep for your records. You will be contacted with the CLE, either by email or snail mail. I'm not sure how they do it. If you have any questions, you can ask me or email the support number, email at the bottom of that form. They can help you. Additionally, we have a survey for you to fill out, so please do not leave this courtroom and go to the wonderful reception until you have that, which I'm about to pass out right now. Okay, any questions for me? Thank you. Oh, huh? Oh, thank you. Thanks.
Speaking of thank yous, I again thank our sponsors and co-sponsors and friends for supporting this and creating really the space for us to be here as a community. And I also want to especially thank a few people who have not already been thanked, and that is the wonderful people from Loyola who have provided the kind of support that we've needed. So Gina Girardi, if you're here, I hope you can
stay, chance to talk and just talk among ourselves and meet people maybe you haven't met. So thank you.